afternoon, migrant leaders, mentors. My name is Elham Fardod. Majority of you know me very well, and I am the founder and CEO of the charity Migrant Leaders. I'd like to personally thank you all for supporting migrant leaders over the last 5 years to help the program become what it is today. We have over 1,200 mentors and 12 corporate partners who have supported us and continue to work with us on collaborations, including insight days, workshops, internships, providing connections and opportunities to our 1,400 amazing migrant leaders mentees. Our 1,200 mentors come from all walks of life. They come from 95 FTSE 100 and leading firms, from a variety of functions and technical fields. And we really appreciate our mentors' support. Today, we have our annual safeguarding live training, and we do this in partnership with the NSPCC. We have here their senior consultant, Kate Meredith, who delivers this training with us. Our annual Migrant Leaders Safeguarding Training is really our way of supporting the migrant leaders mentors and training you in safeguarding in order to embed and further help you adhere to the migrant leaders safeguarding policies and procedures. So really, our safeguarding training is our way of supporting migrant leaders mentors and helping you do your voluntary role. Without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Fawzia, our head of ops, who will further introduce this training. She's been working hard with Kate on this training, and I look forward to speaking to you throughout the webinar. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Elham. I won't do too much more of an introduction because Elham's done such a good job. Really, just to say welcome to Kate. Thank you for joining us again this year, Kate. It's a pleasure to have you, and we really sort of rely on your expertise and your experience that you're going to share with us now to support our mentors in thinking about their roles as mentors and to support them in thinking about safeguarding. Hopefully it's something that won't crop up for them, but if it does, they'll have this as a backup to help them think about how to approach any situations that might arise. So over to you, Kate, if that's okay.
Thank you very much, Fawzia, and thank you, Elham, as well, for those very kind introductions. It's really lovely to be here again with migrant leaders. I am a huge fan of the work that you do and the work that each and every one of the people here gets involved with. I think it's an amazing thing that you offer to young people, and it's a great pleasure to be part of supporting you in that role through this training that Migrant Leaders offers to mentors. I hope it's helpful to you today. As you may know, this is the first of 2 sessions that follow on one from another, and our second session is in a couple of weeks. So it's about 4 hours worth of training altogether, which can feel like quite a long time when you're sitting there on Zoom, but hopefully we'll try and make it as interesting as we can. So we have a lot to cover in the time that we have available. So I think we ought to dive straight in, and I'm going to share my screen with you. This first session does have more sort of PowerPoint stuff than the second session. So I really hope that you'll feel able to bear with me as we go through this. But hopefully it'll be a useful session for you. So I'm just going to share my screen now. Okay, so just a few little preliminaries. I'm sure that you're all very familiar with using Zoom now. If you'd like to keep your cameras on, that's lovely. If you prefer to have them off, then that's fine as well. If you're able to be muted unless you're going to speak, that would be really helpful. Please feel free to use the chat function whenever you want to to do that, or want to share a comment or anything like that at all, we'll keep an eye on that. We're going to aim to have a quick comfort break, but obviously if you need to take a little bit of time away from the screen, then please do that as and when you need to do that. We are recording the session anyway, so you'll be able to catch up if you miss anything. And you might need to have some paper and a pen handy to make some notes on one or two of the little exercises that we're going to be doing as we go through. We are going to be using Menti as well, so a lot of the kind of interactive stuff will be using Menti, that Fawzia's going to run that bit for us. So but a bit of paper and a pen might be handy too. Okay, and also as we always say when we're running safeguarding training, it's really quite common to feel sometimes difficult feelings or memories or thoughts. They can be triggered at times like this. So so please look after yourselves. There are a couple of phone numbers there. Well, one phone number for our helpline, and our email address as well if you're worried about a child. If it's about your own feelings or anything that you want to talk to, then I know that that migrant leaders are very, very good at supporting the program, at supporting their mentors. So I know that they would want you to make sure that you got support with anything that you needed support with. So do speak to someone if you need to. I'm not dashing off at the end of the session either, so if you need to say something afterwards, then that's absolutely fine. A very standard learning agreement, very straightforward really. I know there can be lots of distractions when you're working online. If you're able to maintain focus on the session as much as you can, that would be lovely. And obviously the session is being recorded, so just do be aware of that in anything that you do share. If anything arises that gives us concerns that anybody is at risk, either an adult or a child, then obviously we'll need to have a discussion about how we can take that forward. So it's always worth saying that at the beginning of sessions like this, really. NSPCC is committed to making sure that we try as far as we possibly can to demonstrate principles of equality and diversity and inclusion in all our work, and this extends to our training. So we hope that this is your experience of the training today, in the way in which it's delivered, in the materials, in everything to do with it really. Any feedback that you'd like to offer us, be that of a positive or less positive nature, would be extremely appreciated. So so please feel free to do that, because we really want to get it as right as we can. So that's it for preliminaries really. In terms of our aim today, it's about very much introducing you as participants to your safeguarding responsibilities in your role as mentors, and to help you in terms of developing and growing competence and confidence in fulfilling this aspect of your role. Obviously, I don't know what all of you do in your day job and what experiences you have. I'm sure that many of you are very experienced in safeguarding anyway, or have had reason in some past role that you've had to use safeguarding procedures there. So I really am aware that I'm very likely talking to people who themselves in many cases are experts in safeguarding. So please feel free to draw on that knowledge or that experience in any comments that you want to make about the session today, or anything you want to contribute. And our objectives, they are obviously spread across two sessions. And session 1, as you can see there, we're going to be looking at the legislative context of safeguarding. We're going to focus on England. There are differences obviously in the devolved nations, but it would just take us forever to try and cover all the differences in Northern Ireland and Wales and Scotland. So we are going to focus on the legal position in England. We have information on the NSPCC website about safeguarding law and guidance elsewhere in the UK, if you would like to access that. We're going to look at the types of safeguarding concern that apply to young people, and that will include young adults and of course young migrants, and also how these concerns might be recognised. We're going to think about some of the blocks that can get in the way for young people in terms of disclosing abuse and getting help with situations that they might be experiencing, and also blocks that can get in the way for us as people working with children and young people, either in recognising that something is not right for that young person, or else in finding a way to respond. And we're going to think about how we can overcome some of those blocks and potential barriers. And then for the final part of the session, we're going to look at how you yourselves can stay safe in your mentoring role. Obviously, Migrant Leaders is totally committed to making sure that its mentors are themselves safe in all the ways in which they need to be in this role. And so we need to spend a little bit of time thinking about that. And then obviously in the next session, we'll be looking at some of those other objectives that are also on that slide. So our programme for today, that's how we're aiming to try and run it. Lots to cover and lots of things to say. So legislation first of all, and then we're starting to think about how we can apply that to this age group and for the beneficiaries of Migrant Leaders. Okay, so I hope that is what you're expecting, because that is what we're hoping to deliver for you. So this is the first point where I'm going to be handing over to Fawzia, because we're going to be doing a little bit of work on mentees. So Fawzia, over to you.
So can you see the first question? Yes, I can start. I can see responses coming in.
Yeah, that's really helpful to have that indicator. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next question, which, if I remember correctly, is a word cloud. So we're just asking you to type in what are you most looking forward to as a mentor. Do shout if there's, oh, great stuff. So we're getting some responses coming in. Some really interesting comments coming up there. And it's great that giving back is sort of in the centre. It seems to be a really big response there, so that's great. Developing talent as well, helping young migrant talent, which is great. Supporting growth, guiding, helping young people. And reverse mentoring is an interesting one, actually. We're very keen on that, so it's great for us to see our mentors also learning from our mentees, which I think is great. I think that's probably it for comments now on that one. I'm going to stop sharing that and hand back to you, Kate. And then, do you want to ask the question?
Yes, I was thinking that perhaps we could deal with the question in a different way, because the question was concerns that people might have about their role as a mentor, and about whether if people maybe wanted to put any comments in the chat about concerns that they might have. and we can just have a couple of minutes looking at that. And I think it's an important thing to do, really, because obviously we want the training to try and both recognise and allay people's concerns if they have them. So so if anybody has got anything that they'd like to put into the chat about that, in the same way that you would have done if it was a word cloud on Menti, then that would be really good. I'm just going to open the chat box and see if there's anything there. Yeah, Anthony has put non-attendance. Yeah, I can understand that that if a mentee doesn't turn up to a session, then you think, oh dear, why is that? And yeah, and is it something I've done, or is there something wrong going wrong for that person? Yeah, and Elham has noted down defining the boundaries of the mentoring relationship. Yes, really important. Yeah, Louise has put complex issues beyond my experience. Yeah, and Paul has put knowing the legal context well. Yeah, so some really interesting and understandable concerns emerging from that. Managing expectations. Yeah. So I think hopefully we'll be able to come back to some of those concerns. Yeah, more concerns coming in. Barvin has put mentee not being clear in what they want from the relationship. Omar's put mentee accountability. Yeah. Yeah, so I think there's quite a lot in there that's about boundaries and about what exactly is the mentoring arrangement for, what can it do and what can it not do, and how can that be clarified, and how can those expectations be managed for mentees themselves, and then concerns about oh dear, am I going to get into something here that actually I don't feel confident in dealing with. That comment from Louise about complex issues, and Paul about making sure that you have enough knowledge about the legal context. And I think that one of the things that I would like to say, I don't know if Fawzia, you might have lots of things that you would like to say about this, or Elham as well, is that I think migrant leaders we work with a large number of organisations, and one of the things that I find particularly distinguishes migrant leaders is the quality of the support that is available for you, and the nature of that support, the very human and understanding and compassionate nature of that support that's available. So I think these aren't necessarily concerns that we can kind of just give pat answers to, because that would be not doing them justice. But I think just knowing that if there are any questions that you have in relation to a particular experience that you're having with a mentee, that there is there is someone there available to help with that. Fawzia, I don't know if you would want to say anything in relation to those concerns that people have expressed.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Kate. I would say that if there's ever anything that crops up that you're just not sure about, maybe your mentee isn't getting in touch with you, or perhaps they're asking you things that you don't think necessarily fall into your remit as a mentor, just get in touch with us, drop us an email, and we'll be happy to arrange, either respond on email or arrange a quick chat with you over Zoom or on the phone, and then we can take into account the individual circumstances that are arising. I think it's important that we think about these things on a case-by-case basis and respond to the particular circumstances that arise at the time. We can make suggestions and we can support you. There may be things actually that don't fall within your remit, and I know somebody mentioned mentee accountability. We do expect our mentees to be accountable for their behaviour and to take responsibility for their behaviour and to be engaged in the process. And if that's not happening, then decisions have to be made, and it may be that the mentor has to move on to another mentee, and we then follow up with that mentee and see what the issue is. There may be no issue. They may have just decided that they've got other things they want to do. There may be circumstances that they don't want to discuss with that mentor, but they feel happier discussing it with us. So if you bring those things to our attention, we can always follow up and try and find out, you know, if there's anything else that we can be doing. And at the end of the day, I would say sometimes the mentoring connections end for no particular reason whatsoever, and we don't hear back from the mentee. It may just be that they've moved on, they don't feel the need to be engaged in the programme, and we kind of have to let them make those decisions, and give them agency to be able to make those decisions and opt out of mentoring if that's where they feel that they want to go. It's that old adage, you can, you know, bring a horse to water, etc., etc. So please do come back to us if there's anything that you're not sure about and you want to seek our opinion on, seek our support on. We'll always come back to you and, as I say, discuss the particular circumstances.
I think, Fawzia, I absolutely agree with that. And just to add, before you get to a point where a mentor-mentee connection would need to be changed, there are several steps you can take. The biggest rule of thumb we would give you is, if in doubt, contact us. Contact myself or Fawzia, if in doubt, from any point of view. But even before that, if you think about the background of the mentees we engage with, they come from disadvantaged backgrounds, they are young, they are unsure, so they may not, some of them, many of them, they may not know what they want to get out of the mentoring program. And one of the first places I would point them to as a mentor is online. On our Migrant Leaders website, we have our Capfinity Strength Profile Assessments, which gives them a good assessment tool, which they get a report on their predicted strengths. They can discuss with the mentor then and have a really high quality mentoring conversation. There is our Young Leader modules that we have developed internally that you can tell them to go and have a look at that and come back with questions and thoughts about areas that they could develop. You can then have a conversation with them about how they can develop in those characteristics. So those things are very good opening conversations with a new mentee to break the ice. And I think from those initial conversations, lots of ideas will emerge, both from the mentee and the mentor.
Okay, is there anything that anyone else would like to say about the, for the moment anyway, about issues of concerns that you might have? Yeah. Okay, well, we'll move on. I know that someone, I think it might have been Paul, actually mentioned the issue about legislation and the legislative context. So that is the next thing that actually we're going to be covering now. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen, and we'll move on with that. Okay, so this is a really quick summary of bits of legislation that relate to safeguarding children and young people, and also to safeguarding adults, because obviously mentees kind of straddle both adult and children's legislation. So we need to try and cover both. There's lots of things that we haven't got time to go into, but there's lots of information around, so we can always point you to more detail if you need to know that. So first of all, safeguarding and child protection, those two terms. Many people use these terms interchangeably when they're talking about keeping children safe in particular, but also adults safe. But in legislation and in statutory guidance, they don't actually mean the same thing. So that's quite a useful thing to remember and to actually be aware of. So really, safeguarding is an umbrella term it means all of those things that are now on those slides. It means protecting children from maltreatment. It means preventing the impairment of their health and development, but it also means ensuring that they grow up in circumstances consistent with the provision of safe and effective care, and taking action to enable all children to have the best outcomes that we would want for any child growing up in our society. So in that sense, all of you are doing safeguarding the entire time. All the time that you're being mentors, you are actually doing safeguarding. But for only a tiny amount of that time, if at all, are you necessarily doing work that directly is protecting children from maltreatment. So when we're talking about child protection is really concerned with the first and second of those two bits, those two bullet points under the safeguarding headings. So it's concerned really with promoting children's welfare, and it's in that it is about activity that's taken to protect specific children who are suffering or likely to suffer significant harm. And what we mean by significant harm, it's a term that is taken from the Children Act 1989. So it really means ill treatment or impairment of health and development, as we've said in the first part of the slide, really. And when a court is trying to decide whether the harm is significant or not, the Act asks it to compare this child's health and development with the health and development of a similar child. And that's about as much help as it actually gives. So that's not a whole lot of help, is it, really? But as I say, in this way, you can see that the child protection is like a sort of a subset of safeguarding, which is a wider and more of an umbrella term, really. And those definitions are taken from the statutory guidance Working Together to Safeguard Children. And the latest edition of that is still the 2018 edition. It will be revised at some point, but at the moment we're still working to the 2018 edition of Working Together to Safeguard Children. So this little slide really kind of illustrates that in a slightly more visual way, really. So you can see that safeguarding is the overall umbrella, and child protection is a very significant element of that umbrella. If we look at adult safeguarding, what we are thinking about here is protecting an adult's right to live in safety, free from abuse and neglect. It's about people and organisations working together, both from a preventative point of view and a responsive point of view, really. But at the same time as that, it's about making sure that an adult's well-being is promoted. And that includes having due regard to the person's views, wishes, feelings and beliefs before deciding on any action at all. And it also importantly recognises that we as adults very often have quite complex interpersonal relationships, that we might be ambivalent about things, unclear about things, we might be unrealistic about things, we might make mistakes, but in a sense, as an adult, it's our right to make mistakes. And that actually in adult safeguarding, we have to treat people as adults. So that those points are taken from the Care Act statutory guidance. So the Care Act is really the sort of cornerstone bit of legislation around adult safeguarding. So that's where that guidance comes from. So what we can see really, if we're comparing children's safeguarding and child protection, with adult safeguarding and protecting adults is that there are lots and lots of overlaps, particularly as children get older. But in adult safeguarding, there is a shift in the tipping point, in this sort of fulcrum here of the balance. There's a sort of a shift towards, I suppose, personal freedoms and less emphasis, if you like, on taking decisions on behalf of the person. Whereas if we're talking about children, the idea is actually that fundamentally children, all children are vulnerable simply by the fact that they are children. Obviously, some children are more vulnerable than others, but all children are vulnerable, and that fundamentally our responsibility is to ensure that they're protected. That doesn't mean that we don't listen to what their wishes and feelings are, and that we don't respect those wishes and feelings. And as they get older, those wishes and feelings are of necessity going to carry even more weight, but that fundamentally they are children, and we have a responsibility to ensure that they're safe. So I don't know if I've made that clear enough, really, but it's about it's about a sort of a shift in the ways in which the opposing poles, I suppose, of freedom versus protection are weighted, and that's how it works, really. The mandate to safeguard, it's often easy to think that safeguarding and child protection and adult protection is about things that the police do, things that social services do, but actually the guidance makes it very clear, both for children and for adults as well, that that the responsibility lies with us as well. That it's so those of us who are involved with voluntary sector organisations, those of us who are involved with charities and private sector organisations, those of us who are paid, those of us who are not paid for what we're doing, we all have that responsibility as members of society and as a people working with children and young people to do what we can to promote their welfare, to do what we can to keep them safe within the boundaries of the guidance. If we look at the framework, the legislative framework for child protection, it's quite complicated and it's quite multi-layered. And this slide attempts to illustrate that and to enable us to talk a little bit about how these different layers relate to each other and intersect with each other. And of course, there are again differences amongst the devolved nations, not huge differences in terms of this type of structure, but there are some differences. So if we think about the structure in England, here the top layer would be the primary legislation. And then we would look at statutory guidance. So we've already referred to working together as a very significant piece of statutory guidance. And then we might think about national professional standards. So these would still be applying across the whole of the country, across the whole of England, and in some cases across the whole of the UK, but they are specific to different professional disciplines. So education, for example, the police, social work, lawyers, psychotherapists, all these professions have their own standards in terms of what is required of someone who is a professional in those particular fields. And then beneath that, we're looking at something that actually moves away from being national, but is more locality based. So safeguarding partner arrangements operate within local authority boundaries, and each local authority is required to forge a safeguarding partnership comprising partners who are obliged to be there, who are absolutely mandated to be there, which will be the police and social services and health, but also other partners depending on the circumstances and on the needs and on the arrangements that pertain within that particular local authority areas. So in a lot of local authorities, the voluntary sector plays a very significant part as part of that partnership, as a formal part of that partnership. And those partnerships are embodied in safeguarding boards. So in each local authority area, there'll be a safeguarding children board, there'll be a safeguarding adult board, and in some cases they're merged so that the same board is an enormous board and deals with both children and adults. And then finally, we look at organisational policy and procedures. So these are the policies and procedures that each individual organisation has in relation to safeguarding, which obviously have to dovetail with all these other layers as well. They don't just exist in a vacuum. So Migrant Leaders has its own policy and procedures around safeguarding. And here we can see that that as I said, kind of sits within this this whole framework around child protection. So two of the really important bits of legislation around protecting and safeguarding children are the two Children Acts, the 1989 Act and the 2004 Act. And the most important principle of both those acts really is what we call the Paramountcy Principle, which is that the welfare of children is paramount, and that in any decision that any of us is called upon to make about children, or that courts are called upon to make, or that any organisation is called upon to make in relation to safeguarding children, is that the welfare of that child is the paramount consideration. It goes on to say in the legislation that children are best looked after within their families. In all but a tiny minority of cases, children are best looked after within their families and with their parents playing a full part in their lives, unless the grounds are met for compulsory intervention and unless compulsory intervention in family life is necessary. So there's a great emphasis on keeping children within their families, on maintaining those roots of identity and community for children. So that again is taken from Working Together. Wanted to think a little bit about the concept of a position of trust and the abuse of a position of trust. We talked a bit about this last year when we did this session. So in this sense, the term position of trust is a legal term that's applied to certain roles and settings where an adult has regular and direct contact with children. And in these settings, which can include teachers and care workers and youth justice workers and social workers and so on, in those settings, the legislation has there's legislation to make it an offence for someone in that position of trust, in those positions of trust, to engage in sexual activity with a child in their care, even if that child is over the age of consent. So really it's to close a gap, because obviously it would be illegal for there to be sexual activity with children under the age of 16 anyway, because that child would be under the age of consent. But really this legislation covers that gap between 16 and 18. So it's saying that even if a young person is age 17 and in other circumstances is able to consent to sexual activity, if the other person concerned is in the position of trust in relation to that young person, then that person who is in the position of trust is committing an offence by engaging in sexual activity with that young person. So, as I said, for a number of years that's applied to specific professions that I've mentioned already, but that list of specific professions has been extended quite recently. So in June of last year, there was an amendment to the Sexual Offences Act, and it extended these positions of trust to include people who are offering coaching or teaching or training or supervising or instruction to young people within a sport setting or a religious setting. So as well as all those other settings, it now applies also to sports settings and religious settings. So there are a number of offences that can be positions of trust offences, and the sentence for being found guilty of that is up to 5 years in prison. And obviously that still leaves an awful lot of situations where legally people are not in positions of trust, even though they might be engaged in supervising or coaching or instructing or whatever 16s and 17-year-olds, and actually your roles as mentors comes within that category. So you are not legally within positions of trust, but what your policy would say and what good practice would say, and what all the values that are espoused by migrant leaders would say, is that even though you're not legally in a position of trust, so far as migrant leaders is concerned, you are in a position of trust. So the principles around the relationship that you have with those young people should still apply and should still be included within your code of conduct, even though in your case it's not you are not legally having that role. And what we do know is that this extension of the legal definition of position of trust is quite likely to continue to expand. So there might be next year or whenever, there might be other specific roles and specific situations where the legal definition of position of trust applies. So it's certainly worth being aware of. Not that I think for a minute that any of you would be going against what the Migrant Leaders Code of Conduct says in relation to this, but it's worth knowing about it and knowing what we mean when we talk about a position of trust. So the other things that I wanted to mention quickly, and I'm aware that really talking a lot about all of this, but I know that it's important to cover some of these legal matters really, are these two things really. The first thing is about the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse, or ICSA as it is known for short, which is a huge inquiry that's been going on for a number of years now, and published its final report last October. There have been lots and lots of investigations into sexual abuse of children within organisations. It really looks specifically at abuse of children within organisations rather than within families or whatever. And there have been investigations that have covered a whole different types of organisations, both statutory organisations and voluntary sector organisations and faith sector organisations. And there has not been a single area where evidence of child sexual abuse has not been found, unfortunately. So the final report has come up with 20 recommendations, and we're still waiting for the government response to those recommendations. But 3 of those recommendations very much form the whole centerpiece of the direction of travel that the inquiry would like the government to take on this really. And the first thing is about mandatory reporting. So that's about making it a legal requirement for someone, particularly people within certain professions, to report concerns that they have that a child might be at risk of abuse. It's not currently mandatory in legal terms, even though it is something which the guidance says should happen. The second thing is the setting up of child protection authorities. So these would be authorities that would sit outside any existing organisations and would be mandated to very much take a national lead on child protection. And there would be a ministerial post that would be that they would report to. And the third thing is about a redress scheme. So I suppose a kind of a sort of a compensation scheme, I guess, really, recognising the harm that can be caused to people who suffer sexual abuse as children. So we'll wait to see what happens about that, but it is a huge thing that's happened really over the last year, the publication of this final report, and something that it's worth making you aware of. So the next thing that I wanted to mention about it is the Online Safety Bill. So the Online Safety Bill is a thing that has been talked about for a long time now, really, and it's something that aims to create a regulatory framework that holds internet platform companies to account in terms of protecting young people from abuse online. One of the things that came up within the ICSA investigations was the, I suppose, epidemic of sexual abuse that is now perpetrated online towards children and young people. Very, very concerning, really, and just seems to be escalating more and more and more. So this bill is designed to try and hold internet companies to account about that, and to make them responsible for doing what they can to make the internet a safer place for children and young people. It is a bill that has been very controversial because, again, there is this idea that it potentially infringes upon personal freedoms. And so, again, it's this balancing act between personal freedoms versus safety and protection, and where should the balance be struck? But it's now come back to Parliament, and hopefully will be progressing through the legal process in due course. The NSPCC has been very involved in the Online Safety Bill, and we've been working with a number of different stakeholders in that, including the family of, I don't know if you remember the very sad case of Molly Russell, the young girl who very sadly took her own life as a result of material that she was that she was looking at online. Yeah, very, very sad situation, and we're hoping very much that that bill will soon be will soon reach the point of becoming law. So yeah, so those are a couple of things that we really wanted to make you aware of. Very quickly now, before we move on to the next part of the training, thinking about the national framework for adult safeguarding. So we've looked already at the framework for children's safeguarding. So if we look at the framework for adult safeguarding, as I've mentioned already, the real absolutely fundamental cornerstone for adult safeguarding is the Care Act 2014 and the statutory guidance that flows from that. And a number of principles attached to that that pertain to adult safeguarding. Yeah, and I suppose, yes, it's again, there's that balance between protection versus proportionality. How to do what we can to ensure that adults, particularly adults who have care and support needs and who might be at risk in various ways, are safe, but at the same time making sure that steps that are taken in order to to achieve that safety are proportionate and do not, we don't end up treating adults in a way that is disrespectful and doesn't allow for the fact that they need to be able to make their own choices and have the right to take responsibility for their own lives and for the decisions that they make. In terms of the test that local authorities apply when they're considering whether there is a need for statutory safeguarding intervention in relation to an adult is, first of all, is that person an adult with care and support needs? Secondly, as well as having care and support needs, are they someone who is at risk of abuse and neglect? And thirdly, and crucially, are they somebody who, because of those care and support needs, are not able to keep themselves safe? So that is what a local authority is looking at when it is deciding whether whether there are grounds for statutory intervention in the lives of an adult person who is potentially at risk of abuse and neglect. We always used to talk about vulnerable adults, and we don't actually use that terminology anymore, and we use this terminology adults at risk instead. And I suppose that's an attempt to recognise that all of us are vulnerable at different times in our lives, whatever our circumstances might be. That vulnerability is not necessarily a permanent feature of an adult's life, but it is a feature that all adults will at some point in their lives will have to deal with, and so that change in terminology helps to recognize that, really. Okay, so again, sticking with adult safeguarding, 10 types of abuse are listed in the statutory guidance. That is the list there that you can have a look at for yourselves. I'm not going to go through them all. But of course, what it does say in the guidance is that is not an exhaustive list. Again, that's different from the guidance that we have about children and young people, where there are 4 types of abuse and everything has to fit in with that. With adults, it says very specifically, this is not an exclusive list. It's very much about the experience of that individual adult. And also, it's important to remember that even if that 3-point test that we've just looked at is not satisfied, that doesn't mean that we should be ignoring issues of risk and harm for adults who don't satisfy that 3-point test. But in those cases, for adults who don't, where that 3-point test is not satisfied, then the emphasis is very much on preventing abuse in the first place, offering support and signposting in line with where that person is at in terms of their own situation and what they want to do about it. And if we're offering protection, then it's doing so within a framework of consent, so the adult consenting to that happening. Okay, the Mental Capacity Act, absolutely crucial to adult safeguarding, and attempts to deal with situations where it might be felt that an adult is not able, by virtue of mental capacity, to be able to give consent to a particular situation around safeguarding. So the purpose of the Act really is to ensure that people don't have decisions imposed on them that they could make themselves, and that if they are in a situation where they don't have capacity at that point to make a decision, then any decision that is made on their behalf is based on their best interests. So there's the presumption of capacity to start with, that we start by thinking, yes, the person can make this decision, and that that if support is required to help a person do that, then that is the road that we should take. But we shouldn't be saying that somebody lacks capacity to make a decision because the choice that they're making seems to us to be unwise. And yes, that if a decision does have to be made on behalf of a person, that we use a best interests checklist to make sure that that we are sticking with that person's best interests, and that we're using the least restrictive option in the decisions that are made. So lots and lots of things that we could say about the Mental Capacity Act, but we won't go any further with that at the moment, just because of time, really. So I'm just looking at what the time is now. So it is now coming up to 5 o'clock. So we are running late. So I think we'll just try a couple of these mini scenarios. So these really are an attempt to embed some of the points that we've been discussing about I suppose about consent and about capacity and some of those things that we've been talking about. So if we just look at a couple of these, and what I'd like you to do is to just have a think about in each of these situations, should the person's wish for information not to be shared be respected, or should we share the information even though the person is asking us not to? So if we just look here at Maya, so Maya is 8. She tells her teacher she's being sexually abused by her 15-year-old cousin. She doesn't want anyone else to know. So first of all, is the person who is being abused here, is this person an adult or a child? That's the first decision, or the first point that we need to note. Is this a child who is in need of protection? We would say, yes, she is. She's asking us not to tell anybody else. She doesn't want anybody else to know. Is that something that we should respect, or is that something where we would nonetheless need to do something about that situation? I don't know if anybody would like to offer an answer to their deliberations about that. Okay, anybody wanting to say anything?
Well, I would say that clearly, as Maya is 8, this is a situation that needs to be handled carefully, sensitively, but you know, that should be reported.
Yeah, absolutely. So quite a clear-cut situation where obviously she's in a dreadful situation, really, and it's understandable that she doesn't want anyone else to know. Perhaps she's been subjected to threats or attempts by the older young person to make sure that she doesn't tell anybody. But nonetheless, our duty there is really clear. That is a situation where that information needs to be passed on. Yeah. Okay, so what about the next one here then? So Freddie is 30, so clearly an adult. He's a recovering alcoholic with long-term mental health problems. And he tells a helpline that a drug dealer has moved into his flat and is withholding his medication from him, and he doesn't want anyone else to know. So a more difficult one, this one, really. So I don't know what you might think about that in relation to whether that is a situation where we should be passing that information on or not. Anybody got any ideas about that one? Fawzia, what's your thoughts about this one?
I can see some comments coming in, and people are saying that that he is at risk and an adult and should be protected. I would agree. I mean, this is actually there's an amount of illegality going on here with a drug dealer moving into the property, presumably benefiting from using that property. This is a situation known as cuckooing in the police and drug dealing world, where basically somebody who is considered to be at risk is basically manipulated into a situation to allow criminality to happen, and their rights are basically withheld from them. So this is a matter that I would actually, if I became aware of it, I would report to the police, quite frankly.
Yes, and I think that seems to be reflected in the chat as well. Yes, so Freddie is an adult. He's clearly an adult with care and support needs. He's clearly someone who is vulnerable, and also very significantly, what is clearly happening here is something that is illegal. That, yes, as Forgia says, this term cuckooing, his house has basically been taken over by a drug dealer who is involved in illegal activity from and using Freddie's home in order to carry out that activity, and at the same time is actually causing significant harm really to Freddie as well. So although Freddie doesn't want anyone else to know, Freddie's really in a position where he's basically lost control of his own home, and also there is criminal activity being carried out from his home. So for those reasons, really, that is definitely a situation where that information would need to be passed on. It would need to be done carefully. And I think if anyone wasn't quite sure, oh gosh, he's an adult, it's a bad situation that he's in, but he's saying he doesn't want anybody to know about it. If you're not sure about that kind of situation, then the best thing really is to just check it out, not to sort of make a unilateral decision. Okay, well, he's an adult, so really we should be not doing anything here. It is a situation where in the first instance, obviously, you would be wanting to speak to, as a mentor, you'd be wanting to speak to Forgia or someone in the program team about that situation. So yes, an adult, but nonetheless a situation where there needs to be some reporting. So let me try and move it on to no, I think I'm going to go back to, yeah, let's look at this one, Phil. Phil is 17, so Phil is, he's not an adult, he is 17. He tells his college counselling service that his partner, aged 19, is starting to be physically abusive during sex. He doesn't like it, but doesn't want to report anything because in other ways, the relationship is good. Any thoughts about that one?
Again, I mean, I would just comment that this is an example of domestic violence, isn't it? And
yes,
so
it is. Yeah.
In that sense, it's again reportable, not only the fact that there's physical abuse going on, but the fact that Phil is 17 and therefore a child.
Yes, absolutely, Forgia. He's yes, we have someone here who is a minor. He's 17, and therefore, the child protection framework needs to be applied. We're working within the children's legislative framework here. It is something where maybe we can afford to take a little bit of time over it. I don't think it's one where necessarily there needs to be an immediate referral, because it's a situation where although it's a bad situation and although there's some physical abuse going on, it perhaps is it's worth maybe trying to take a little bit of time to see if it can be done with Phil's consent rather than with him saying he really doesn't want anything doing about it. But ultimately, if he's still saying no, I don't want anything doing about this, ultimately it is something that needs to be reported on. So yeah, so all these things that it's not always clear cut, but and sometimes there can be room for a bit of manoeuvre around trying to seek consent before ultimately taking a step to report something. But I guess it's a case of actually not trying to take these decisions on our own and actually seeking advice and guidance and support around trying to unpick what's happening. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to move us on a little bit, particularly in view of the time. And I'm just aware that actually we've now got to, it's just after 5 o'clock, and I've been talking for quite a while, and I don't know if you want to take a short break, really, just for people to stretch their legs and to just to grab a glass of water or whatever it is. So would that be something that you'd like to do, or would you just like me to carry on?
I think, Kate, if people can take just 5 minutes until 5:15, that should be okay.
Yeah, that would be good. So so shall we do that? So yes, yes, give yourselves a bit of a shake and a bit of standing up and sitting down again, and we'll see you at 5:15. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there. So we've got to 5:15 now. So I'm hoping that that people are back. It's a bit difficult to tell, but I'm assuming that that hopefully you're back with us now. Oh, thank you very, very much there. There's a few thumbs up here from everybody, and a few little notes in the chat. So thank you very much. So I think we'll press on because there's still quite a lot to get through and we're running behind a little bit, so I'm going to try and speed up. So the next topic that we're going to be looking at is really thinking specifically about the 16 to 25 age group, which is the age group that that you are working with as mentors, and also the fact that actually your mentors are likely to be first or second generation migrants. So having a little think about the specific relevance of safeguarding to that group. So I'm just going to share screen again. So why is safeguarding relevant for the 16 to 25 age group and for young people who may be first or second generation migrants? So if we're thinking about old teens and young adults, there are some specific things about their lives. There are some specific aspects of their situations that potentially makes them vulnerable. And here is a list of some of those. And in a sense, all young people of that kind of age potentially face vulnerabilities, because it's an age when we're all starting to become much more independent, when perhaps we're away from home for the first time, we're exposed to new risks as well. But we know that in addition to that, a number of young people might be more vulnerable than others, and we know that for some young migrant people, there may be additional vulnerabilities, for example, around discrimination, around language barriers, around adjusting to life in the UK if they're relatively newly arrived, around maybe sort of cultural tensions and clashes between expectations of their families and what they want to do with their lives. So some additional vulnerabilities there for some of the young people that we're working with. And there's a very comprehensive list of some of these things in your migrant leaders policy. So I would urge you to have a look at that and to refer to that policy and have a read of some of that material. what I'd like to do really is to very quickly share 3 concepts with you that I think are relevant to the situation that the beneficiaries of migrant leaders might find themselves in. And I imagine that some of you at least will be likely to be familiar with some of these concepts. So the first one is contextual safeguarding, and the second one is trauma-informed practice, and the third one is the notion of intersectionality. And I think they help us to understand some of the complexity of the safeguarding issues that potentially our young people might be having to deal with. So if we look at contextual safeguarding first of all, so contextual safeguarding is an approach that that actually recognizes that as young people grow up, they are moving within a whole range of different environments and different situations away from their families, and that some of those environments, be they online environments or offline environments, may expose them to a whole range of different risks, and also that the relationship between the young person and that particular environment is a dynamic relationship. So young people interacting with their peers or finding their way around online or doing whatever it is that they're doing need to find ways of thriving, or at the very least surviving, in these environments in which they are spending time. And if those environments are environments that expose them to risks, then it means that their survival strategies and the strategies that they use in order to do as well as they can in those environments may of necessity require them to adopt certain behaviours or certain ways of coping, which in themselves could expose them to further risk. So the way of actually the view about how we should respond to these situations according to the contextual safeguarding model is that we should not just try and focus on interventions with the young person, him or herself, themselves, that we should be thinking about the actual environment itself and be thinking about how we can, within that environment, disrupt the elements that could be presenting risks to young people. So if we return to the online safety bill, for example, finding ways of making internet companies accountable and responsible for making their platforms safer is a way of making changes in an environment rather than in the individuals who are using that environment. And that can also be applied to the real world as well. So for example, the contextual safeguarding approach has been used a lot in relation to public spaces or gangs or child sexual exploitation, and it means looking at the environments where some of those activities can happen. So, for example, child sexual exploitation can sometimes be taking place, say, for example, in hotels or by using taxi companies in order to move young people around. If we can actually intervene within those environments and make changes with those environments and engage the people who are working in those environments who might not typically be thought of as people who would have a part to play in the safeguarding agenda, then actually what we're doing is reducing the inherent risks in those environments that actually means that a young person who's spending time there is less likely to be at the same level of risk. And we can combine that also, of course, with work with the young people themselves. So it's a really interesting kind of approach, and it's an approach that has a lot of implications for how local safeguarding partners work together, and calls for ideally calls for quite a coordinated approach between different elements of a safeguarding partnership in order to make sure that everybody is playing their part to make some of those contexts, some of those environments useful and safer for young people. So if you're wanting to find out more about contextual safeguarding, it is an approach, well, it's a phrase that was coined by Professor Carleen Firmin, who at that time was at the University of Bedfordshire, but I think a lot of the activity has moved to Durham University now. But you can Google contextual safeguarding network, and there's all sorts of interesting resources and information and all that kind of thing on that website that will tell you much more about that approach. So the next approach that I wanted to just draw your attention to really is, or the next set of ideas, is around trauma-informed practice. And the idea of what we call ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. So these are potentially traumatic events that occur in childhood, or else aspects of a child's environment that can undermine stability and security and bonding for a young person. And a number of core experiences have been identified, but of course there could be others as well. And these are some of the experiences that are thought of as being potentially traumatic if they happen to or around a young person as they're growing up. And what we know is that such experiences as this can lead to longer term problems for young people. It can lead them to longer term health problems, mental health problems, substance abuse problems in adulthood, and can have a negative impact on their education and their job opportunities and their earning potential. So really things that actually, you know, we would want to try and protect young people from if we possibly can. And the good news is that actually there are things that can be done to both prevent these things happening in the first place and also to, I suppose, shield a young person from the harm that can sometimes occur if these things have taken place within a young person's life. And often it's not just one of these things, but say several of the things on this list all happening at the same time, or all happening during a child's early years, that can actually have a traumatic impact. So in terms of what we can do in order to build resilience to these potentially traumatic events, one of the things that we know can really help to both prevent trauma happening in the first place, or else build a child's ability to recover more quickly from the impact of these events, is having one or more stable, caring child-adult relationships in that child's life. Another thing can be about equipping young people to manage their behaviour and their emotions. Another can be around young people having opportunities to be involved and connected in things that they enjoy doing. Another can be helping young people to understand that they are supported, that there are people and sources around them that actually want to help them, and that they can overcome hardship, and they can go on to be successful, and they can go on to do all sorts of amazing things in their lives. And if we think about what is this got to do with migrant leaders, hopefully the link will be fairly obvious to you, really, because these are all things that that mentoring can deliver. All of those four things are things that a mentoring relationship can contribute to. So I guess if we think about some of the experiences that young migrants might have faced, perhaps even more than some other groups of young people, they are young people who potentially have been exposed to traumatic experiences, and so they are incredibly fortunate, really, to have been able to be invited to be part of the mentoring program, and to be able to work with people like yourselves who can support them in this kind of way. Intersectionality is the last of these three ideas that we wanted to develop, and this is a concept that was first developed in the 1980s, and as part of sort of feminist thinking, really. So the idea is that all oppression is linked, and that social categorizations are interconnected, and that actually everyone has their own unique experience of discrimination or oppression, and that it may not just be in one particular area of their lives, but in several areas of their lives or areas of their identity that overlap each other, and that can create interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. So intersectionality is often represented in a kind of what we used to call sort of Venn diagrams when I was at school, really, where each circle represents an aspect of one's identity, and that if one aspect of a person's identity is changed, so if we think of gender, for example, that can actually have an overlapping implications for the person's experience of oppression altogether, really, in terms of also of their racial identity or their sexuality, or of whether they have a disability or not. So it's quite a hard thing to explain, and I'm probably not explaining it very well, but it is a thing that's worth thinking about, this idea that that we all have that unique story, and that some of us have been incredibly privileged and experienced very, very little discrimination or oppression, and others of us have actually had a lot of experience of, unfortunately, of these things for all sorts of different reasons, really. Yeah, so that was what we wanted to say about that. Moving on quickly, really, to blocks and barriers to young people sharing their worries. So we want to spend a little bit of time looking at this. So yes, very hard for any young person to talk about things that are happening to them, bad things that are happening to them. But for some young people, it can be even harder. And the reasons why it can be so difficult, particularly difficult for some young people, can perhaps be linked to the young person's own characteristics or vulnerabilities or circumstances. So an example of that might be disability. There are reasons why in many situations it can be harder for a young person with particular disabilities to get help than it can for a young person who isn't disabled. Or these barriers could be barriers that are deliberately put in place by a perpetrator as part of the grooming process. So an example of that might be if a perpetrator is threatening a young person that if they tell anybody about what's going on, then something bad will happen to their family, or something bad will happen to them, or whatever. That's an example of one way in which perpetrators can groom young people, and it's also an example of a barrier for a young person, quite clearly, in actually seeking help and getting help. Or we also need to remember that sometimes barriers can be created unintentionally by factors in an environment that could otherwise help to protect the child. So we ourselves, who for all that we want to help young people, and for all that we want to listen to young people and not present barriers, we ourselves, or organisations that we work within, can unintentionally create those barriers or get in the way of young people getting help, rather than helping them to seek help. And that is a thing, obviously, that we need to be mindful of and try not to allow to happen. So again, what I want to do at this point really is to hand over again to Forgia to have another go at using Menti to I suppose name some of these barriers that young people face in those particular 3 areas, whether they're barriers linked to a child's characteristics and circumstances, barriers that are put in place by a perpetrator, or barriers that are unintentionally created by an environment or by individuals who really have the best of intentions towards a young person. So Forgia, would you like to take it from here, and I shall stop sharing.
Thanks, Kate. So the question is, what are some of the barriers young people face in getting help if they are being abused? And you should be able to enter, you should be able to type in some of your thoughts. There's just over a minute to type in your responses.
Sure. Yeah, so a really good range of responses that people have put there, really. So yeah, so the environment that as someone has put there, yeah. So environments can be quite hostile environments, and can be quite difficult for a young person to be able to get help in the particular environment in which they are. Yeah, so lack of knowledge, adults being busy or unapproachable. I mean, I guess that's a really good example of the third type of barrier that we were thinking about. So those of us with the best of intentions who want to be available and helpful to a young person, but we might lack the knowledge that we need in order to be able to know how to do that, or in order to be able to realize that someone is struggling, or else we're too busy, or else we come across in a way that is perhaps perceived as unapproachable, perhaps because we're busy and we're always rushing around trying to get things done. Threats, fear, yeah, absolutely, these are really good barriers that often are types of barriers that perpetrators would put in place as part of the grooming process. Fear of reprisals, yes, again, another one of those. Yeah, or someone has put that the young person is perhaps shy or scared or confused. That's about the young person's own vulnerabilities and own characteristics. We can speculate on why a young person might be confused. Perhaps the young person doesn't recognize that what is happening to them is actually abusive, because they love the person who's hurting them, and they don't recognize that for what it is, or they're too embarrassed or ashamed or whatever, really. So all sorts of things that can be going on in the mind and heart of that young person that makes it hard for them to talk about what's happening and to get help. Yeah, peer pressure, again. I mean, what we know, unfortunately, is that a great deal of the abuse that young people experience is from other young people. It's now called child-on-child abuse rather than peer-to-peer abuse, as it used to be called. But yes, a worrying amount of abuse is perpetrated by by other young people, often online, sometimes offline. So lots of really helpful responses there. So thank you very much for that range of responses. Yeah. Okay, Portia. Yeah.
So the next question is about how mentors can help with that. So I'll just move on to the next slide. And you should be able to type in your thoughts about how you can, what you can do to help young people overcome those sorts of barriers that we've just talked about.
So one of the things there that someone has put is talk to a trusted adult. So I suppose that is something that could apply either to a mentor or to a young person, isn't it? So so it's we as mentors can talk to a trusted adult about what we can do to support young people, and also we can encourage mentees, young people that we're working with, to think about whether there are adults that they can talk to get help with the issues that they need to talk about. The importance of offering reassurance. Yes, absolutely. Alleviating that terrible fear and shyness, and a terrible sense of shame that so many young people have if they're facing abuse, because the perpetrator has very often encouraged them to think this is all their fault. Actually, they're the ones who've are responsible for the abuse. It's them being encouraging the perpetrator, or whatever it is, distorted thinking that the perpetrator uses in order to make the young person have those feelings. So anything that we can do in our both in verbally or in our non-verbal communication with the young person that offers reassurance to that young person and helps to alleviate those awful feelings that they might have, and recognizing that it can take really quite a long time before a young person might feel able to even begin to talk about the things that are really burdening them. Listening is active listening is a very underrated virtue, isn't it, really? Just being available. Yes, that's part of listening, isn't it, really? Just being available to that young person, even if it means not actually necessarily saying very much, not necessarily feeling obliged to fill up all the space with one's own words, but just making time to listen. Someone else has said there. So that whole theme about listening is and again, listen and support is come across very strongly from all the people here. Offering support and guidance and possible resources. Absolutely, some really good resources that I think are available to you. I think some of them are available in the material that Migrant leaders have, and we're going to be talking about resources at the next session as well. A couple of really good signposting organisations are either Childline for children, or The Mix is another sort of online counselling and support service for older teenagers and young adults. So really good sources of support. Creating a safe environment. All the things that we can do about making that space, that mentoring space, a safe space for the young person. So and sharing the knowledge that we have in a way that is supportive to the young person. So some really great answers there. So thank you so much for all of those.
I'm going to stop sharing that now and hand back to you, Kate.
Okay, thank you, Portia. So this is what we've been covering, really. Some of the barriers that young people face. So we've been through all of those, and you can see that as the barriers build up, then the young person becomes invisible, really. How we become a door instead of another brick in the wall, and that's what we've really been talking about. And this is the exercise that we've just done. So finally, in our session today, we're going to be thinking about your safety as mentors, about how you can stay safe, both in terms of your physical health and your mental health. And also we're going to be giving a bit of thought to the risk of unsubstantiated allegations being made against you as mentors, and minimizing that risk. And it's often something that we don't like to talk about, or don't like to think is there. And it is a low risk, but it would be disingenuous really to say that it isn't a risk at all. So we need to be thinking about that as well. So first of all, I think it's important to look at what Migrant Leaders offers in order to help mentors stay safe. And again, Fawzia, I don't know if you want to say something about this, because obviously it's about your guide and code of conduct and all the things that the mentoring program team offers to do with this. So would you like to say something about this?
Yes, certainly. I mean, this is the material that we provide to all of our mentors when they volunteer as mentors, and we recommend that you keep the mentoring guide and the code of conduct handy so that you can refer to it when you might have a question or you may be unsure about something. We talk about safeguarding and protecting young people, but also thinking about your own exposure in terms of managing the mentoring connection. So setting boundaries, only sharing your public facing contact details, not sharing too many details about your private circumstances, and making it clear that the connection is to be focused on the personal and professional development of the young person. So it's not necessarily to do with their personal lives, it's to do with developing them in their careers and their academic ambition. So being clear about where your role starts and finishes, really. As I mentioned before, we're always here. If you have any questions that you're unsure about, you can always get back in touch with us. We've got this guide and code of conduct, and then we've also got the safeguarding policy, which is a lot more detailed and available on our website. I think that's about all I need to say on that at the moment. Thanks, Kate.
Yeah, thanks, Fawzia. I think when sort of reflecting on this really and thinking about some of the concerns that people raised really helpfully at the beginning of the session, and about how a number of those concerns were to do with expectations that mentees might have, unrealistic expectations, and how to manage those, and also about the whole issue of boundaries. I think that that this guide really helps with that, and I think really helps to focus on what the agenda of the mentoring process is, what it can do, what it can't do, what level of commitment is required, and the idea of working in this quite a structured way. So I think really when I read that for the first time, I remember thinking, oh gosh, that if I were a mentor, that would be such a helpful thing, because I would feel as though I was being given a really quite a clear brief, and that I could actually clarify that with the young person as well. You know, that we could make that really clear at the beginning of our relationship, and at times we can come back to that if ever I felt that that somehow or other there was a risk of straying away from it, or that the mentee was sort of starting to push those boundaries a bit. So I think really helpful guide and helpful support from the program team. Yes, so that is what Migrant Leaders offers as an organisation. But also there's the whole question about what you as individual mentors can do in terms of taking care of your own physical and mental health in your role. And you might have lots of ideas about what you do in order to look after your own mental health, and it would be great perhaps to share those at the end if we've got time, or next time that we meet. But clearly boundaries, working within those boundaries is a really helpful thing to do. Making sure that if you've got concerns about the impact of the role on your health or other commitments, if your circumstances change, if life just suddenly becomes a whole lot more difficult for whatever reason, or even a bit more difficult for whatever reason, and it's harder to maintain the role that you would like to maintain as a mentor, to feel okay about raising those concerns as soon as possible. And then all the stuff that we know about needing to take time to relax and reflect, and paying attention to our own learning and our own need for networking and contact with each other. And then ultimately, obviously, when you become a mentor, it's not about signing your life away. It's about spending some time as a mentor on the program. And if there's a need to take time away from that role, perhaps on a temporary basis, perhaps on a permanent basis, or whatever, then that is absolutely fine. And it's about making that clear to migrant leaders. So they're some of the kind of ideas that I had really about what individual leaders, mentors might be able to do for themselves, which complements what it is that the organisation is offering. If you've got any other thoughts about what do you do to keep healthy, what you do to make sure that you stay safe and stay okay, then yeah, do pop them in the chat, and as I say, hopefully we'll have time to have a look at them. We'll talk about them at the end. So then if we turn to the issue about unsubstantiated allegations, obviously it's important to say that sometimes allegations are made against people who work with children, and those allegations have to be taken seriously, and those allegations are substantiated and have to be dealt with, and migrant leaders as a responsible organisation has a policy and procedure for dealing with those, and that cannot be shied away from really. But sometimes allegations can be made. It's rare for allegations to be made anyway, and occasionally, even when they are made, they are groundless, or they're malicious, or they're based on a misunderstanding. I mean, in all the years in which I've worked with young people, which now is well over 40 years, I think that has only happened on 2 occasions to people that I've known or people that I've been responsible for as a manager, which is not really very many times, is it, in all those years? But on both occasions that it did happen, they were allegations that were not substantiated. So clearly working within those boundaries and the code of conduct that we've been talking about will go a long way towards reducing the risk of those allegations happening, because it's really reducing the risk of anything that you say or do being misunderstood or misinterpreted, or boundaries becoming looser or fuzzy, and for a young person, particularly a young person who might be vulnerable, to get mixed messages about what's happening really. But working within those migrant leaders' boundaries will really help to drastically reduce the risk of that happening. But of course, if we work with other people of whatever age, you know, whether they're young people, whether they're adults, whether they're elderly people, then that inevitably carries an element of risk. We can't, you know, life carries an element of risk with it, and actually putting ourselves out there and being available to people involves, to an extent, recognizing that there is some risk to that, and that is what we that is what we accept as part of the commitment and the gift of time and gift of ourselves that we make to that service or to that organization. So to help manage that risk, there are steps that a mentor can take in order to be able to I suppose really keep the risk of unsubstantiated allegations to a minimum. And here's a list of some of the things that I thought of and that Fourzier and I have talked about. So it's thinking about our behaviour and our language and our written communication that could potentially be misinterpreted. So it's not about it's not just what we mean in how we behave or what we say or how we communicate, but it's what the mentee might think that we're meaning, or hidden or semi sort of hidden things that a mentee might mistakenly read into things that we are doing or saying. So it's thinking about that, being really thoughtful about those things when we're communicating. It's about keeping a record of sessions. It doesn't have to be a detailed record, but just a brief record of sessions that we have with a young person. And it means, the thing that we've been saying a lot during the session about speaking to the programme team at the earliest opportunity, not to allow things to build up, not to allow things to fester, not to allow the worries to build up in your own mind about things. If, for example, you think that a mentee might be becoming over-dependent on you, or might be developing some sort of crush upon you, which we know is a phenomenon that can happen really when working with young people. Or it's equally the case that sometimes those of us who work with young people can develop such feelings for the mentee, whether that's feelings about I don't know, projected feelings about that you are there to look after that person, almost as for that person were your child, for example, or even feelings that might be of a sexual nature. That is a thing that can happen as well. Then again, it's the important thing is to recognize that and actually to deal with it rather than to let those feelings build up. Or else, on the other hand, whether there's any reason why you have a sense that the mentee might be harboring hostile feelings towards you, for any reason whatsoever, really. Maybe you remind the mentee of somebody else, or maybe the mentee, as I've said in the next point, has asked you to do something that is not appropriate and you've said no, and that then has generated hostility. Or you yourself, at the end of the day, have ended up doing or saying something that is in breach of the code of conduct or the guidance, or even if it isn't a breach, you now think, oh gosh, I shouldn't have said that, or I shouldn't have done that, or I've got myself into a bit of a situation here. Everybody makes mistakes, really, and the important thing to do is to deal with that if we think that might have happened. And it may well have been a completely unintentional or something that we didn't mean to do at all, but that it's something that we need some support with now. So all of those things are about recognizing that we're human, and having the courage to say, this is something that I think is happening here, and please can I talk about it? Yeah, any thoughts about any of those points, Fourzier, or any other things that you would want to add to that list?
Kate, it's worth mentioning that we've just arrived at 6 o'clock, so can we say that we might run over by 5 minutes?
Yes, I'm happy to do that if other people are okay with doing that. I'm just checking in the chat now to see.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, 1 or 2 people have had to leave already. So yeah. So yes, absolutely. We are almost at the end now, but yeah.
The only thing that I would say to add to what you've already said, Kate, about minimising risk, is something that I have to remind myself often, is that I'm not their mother, the mentee's mother. So, you know, you have to kind of remind yourself that you're not the parent of these young people, and you kind of do have to try and be objective and take a step back sometimes if you start getting towards that parenting style of communication, and try and keep it on an adult to adult, even though they are young people and they're not legally adults. We want to encourage them to be operating eventually in the adult world, and so behaving towards them as if they are adults, but being aware that their ability to understand may not be as developed as yours. So using appropriate language, but setting expectations that the young people are going to take responsibility, or a certain amount of responsibility, for being engaged in the mentoring connection, I think is important.
Yeah. And I think it's that is very much in keeping with what the focus of the relationship is, isn't it, really, Fawzia, as well, that it is on the young person's career path. It's not a counselling relationship. It is very much around their aspirations in terms of what they're going to do with their lives, really. So it's yeah, so it very much fits with that, doesn't it? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. And it's important because we eventually are encouraging what I say to the young people when I interview them, and I'm sure Elham does the same, is that, you know, initially the contact is from the mentor, and the mentor may well be taking the lead in organising meetings, etc. But eventually we want the mentees to take over, and there's a natural pattern to, as the young people get older and become adults, the natural pattern is that they will be taking more and more responsibility for their own decision, and in the same sense they'll be taking more and more of a lead in the mentoring connection in terms of organising sessions, setting the agenda, and I think part of the process for mentors is to encourage that transition.
Yeah, absolutely, but really helpful, thank you. So we are almost at the end of our session really now. Are there any questions that anyone has at this stage, or anything that anybody would want to say about what we've covered? We've ranged over a wide range of things, really. We've been looking at the legislative context. We've been looking at the types of safeguarding concern that apply to young people, and how they might be recognised. We've been looking at the whole question about blocks and barriers, and how we can unintentionally create them, and how we can help dismantle them. And we've been looking at the whole issue about staying safe in your role. So any questions or thoughts that anyone has about any of those points, or any of those issues that we've covered? You can either put it in the chat, or else you could raise your hand. You'd have to raise it with the little yellow hand, because I can't see you. I'm just going to look in the chat now. Yeah. Yeah, so I think everybody's probably wanting to get themselves off now, and a few people are needing to go. So yeah, so thank you to those of you who are taking your leave, and I think probably the best thing is to leave it there, because people do need to go. Next session, which is the 25th of January, really hope that you're all able to come. We're going to be doing more about recognising signs and indicators, what to do if you've got a concern, question of recording. We're going to spend quite a lot of time looking at more detailed case scenarios, and at some resources to help you in your roles. So that's for next time. But thank you so much for today, everyone, and for your commitment over the last couple of hours. Yeah, so that's all from me. I don't know if if Fawzia or Elham would like to say anything else.
No, I'd really wholeheartedly like to thank our Migrant Leaders mentors for being so engaged with the programme and the young people we support. And thank you particularly to you, Kate, and to Fawzia as well, of course, for working on this. It's been great as ever, and we look forward to the next session.